Ronald the Rules Lawyer, and today I'm going to do a deep dive into the remastered Wizard, our classic spellcaster. This will be very interesting because one of the key features of a wizard to be able to specialize in an arcane school is being affected by the removal of the 8 magical schools. That was something the designers had wanted to do, it sounds like, but it was also prompted by breaking away from the OGL and remnants of D&D lore that were in the Pathfinder books. In this video, I also revisit the brouhaha that flared up over the summer when some Pathfinder players on forums were worried that Paizo was weakening casters in this new incremental edition. One of the things that occasioned this was Specialist Wizard's bonus spell slot not being fillable by 1/8 of the entire arcane spell list, and that being replaced by a narrower list of spells in a school curriculum. Also was prompted by the very positive reception to the at-will caster embodied by the kineticist in the Rage of Elements rulebook that came out in the summer. I put out these videos then, and I thought that the idea that the designers wanted to nerf spellcasters was concluding that was premature, and we will revisit that in this video. Now, before the remaster, I personally thought wizards were fine, and given that, yes, there is a narrower selection of spells in a curriculum, that maybe we would see some buffs elsewhere for the wizard to make up for that, just as we've seen buffs for other options for the other classes. So I'll touch on that in addition to my usual remaster deep dive. I'm Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I am a lawyer who has been game mastering for 13 years. I taught in after-school middle school RPG class for most of that time. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2E. I've been doing a lot of coverage of the Pathfinder remaster. If you want to be notified about the remaining videos, and also, of course, future videos that I'll continue to make, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Also, support my Patreon. I don't get paid as a lawyer, the kind of work I do, and it allows me to continue my channel. You also get exclusive access to videos, including my 3.5-hour recording going through the player core and GM core, and me running Pathfinder for D&D YouTubers. The D&D YouTuber series is for Tier 2 supporters and above, as well as early access to many of my videos. So as per usual, I will go over the basics of the class first, since many people are coming to Pathfinder for the first time with the release of the remaster, before I go over what has changed compared to the current version. It is our quintessential spellcaster, our nerd who learns magic by studying books, an intelligence-based class. Of the 4 magical traditions in Pathfinder, they cast spells on the Arcane list. It's the biggest spell list and the most versatile, doing a variety of things. You will not find healing in here, however. They don't cast spells from the entire list, however. They have a musty tome, a spell book, that they collect spells in. Their book starts with 10 cantrips and 5 first-rank spells. In the morning, they prepare their castings of spells. And when I say castings, if you're used to D&D 5e, 5e is kind of an outlier in the history of D&D games. Pathfinder 2e's prepared spellcasters, they're also spontaneous ones, use the traditional Vancian spellcasting. In the morning, they prepare cantrips, and they can cast these an unlimited number of times. However, above that, this should actually say first rank, which is the new term for spell level. They prepare individual castings, and they kind of have to predict not only what spells they'll use that day, but how many times they'll need it. And when they cast a spell, they cross it off their list for that day. It is possible to be more flexible in their spell casting, to have casting be like D&D 5e, and that requires taking the flexible spellcaster archetype, which gives you fewer spell slots, but I will not go into that. That's beyond the scope. They also completed their studies by doing a wizard's thesis, and this is one of the 2 subclasses they get to choose at first level. Experimental spell shaping gives the wizard bonus feats that let him modify spells as he casts them. Improved familiar attunement gives a magical being, usually an animal, that provides utility. It has more abilities than other wizards' familiars, which moreover they have to take a feat to get one in the first place. Spell blending allows the wizard to combine the power of lower rank spell slots to have more higher rank spell slots at the beginning of the day. Spell substitution lets the wizard spend 10 minutes to replace any of their prepared spells with another from their spellbook. Staff Nexus gives the wizard a makeshift staff at level 1 that they can improve, that gives more flexibility in spellcasting in addition to the greater number of daily castings that a staff already gives a spellcaster. In addition, a wizard has the choice to specialize in an arcane school, and this is the list of the schools in the player core. An arcane school gives you a bonus spell slot per spell rank that is filled by a spell from that school's curriculum. You also get additional spells in your spellbook. You also get a focus spell. Focus spells are spells that you can cast several times in the day because they draw from your focus point pool. You start with a focus point pool of 1, and 10 minutes lets you get a focus point back. Each school has their own unique focus spell. Some wizards may choose not to have a curriculum and be part of the School of Unified Magical Theory. They do not get bonus slots for curriculum spells. They get their own focus spell, however. Wizards also, once per day, can drain a bonded item, a store of magical power on their person, to cast again one of their expended prepared spells. They do this once per day, and wizards of the School of Unified Magical Theory have the additional benefit of being able to do this once within each spell rank that they attain. And you can have up to 10 spell ranks if you get to level 19 in this game. Wizards, like all Pathfinder characters, get class feats. They get one every even-numbered level. This lets you further customize your class. Not every wizard is the same. If you come from D&D 5e, think of warlock invocations. That's what class feats are like. And this book has 44 wizard feats. It's actually small compared to what we saw for some of the other classes in this book. To help the new player, there are a couple of sample builds in the book. Here is a Mindbender. It gives suggestions on attributes, skills, arcane school thesis, and some feats to take. So on to changes in the remaster. First, changes to wizard proficiencies. Everything's the same, except they now are proficient with all simple weapons. Gone are the days where wizards just are the worst at weapons. This is a nice change. They no longer have to deal with a feat tax if they ever want to get a martial weapon. Currently, they're only proficient with a handful of weapons, and they have to take the weapon proficiency feat to become trained with all simple weapons first, before they can take it again in order to be proficient with martial weapons. That feat tax is gone, and they can start wielding long spears and frying pans at level 1. The remaster also gives spellcasters a universal spellcasting proficiency. So wizards are not trained only in arcane spells, so the wizard's eventual legendary spellcasting ability at level 19 is transferable to spells they gain from archetypes. They also get a class DC, which is the generic stat that some abilities can refer to. So if they ever go far afield from their wizardliness, they're now not completely gimped in an ability. It's also worth noting that spellcasting components are now removed, with 2 exceptions that I found that required having an interplanar locus in hand. Every spell in the game you can cast while wielding something in both hands. So a wizard wielding a staff and a shield, all classes are proficient with shields in Pathfinder, can cast the whole gamut of spells that they have now. So some of those powerful spells that had a material component, like Wall of Stone, you can cast now without having to spend actions to rearrange what you're holding in your hands. So that's a nice streamlining of spellcasting. The 5 arcane theses, what's changed here? Nothing has changed, except that we see the incorporation of options from the Advanced Player's Guide, namely the Staff Nexus option. Everything looked the same, except there was one little wrinkle I found for the familiar one. It says you get the Drain Familiar free action instead of Drain Bonded item. That's the one that lets you recast a spell that you expended today. The wrinkle I found is that it says it works exactly the same as Drain Bonded item. However, when you look at that action, it says that the bonded item is on your person as a requirement. That's a change from the previous language. It currently requires you not to have acted on your turn, which is an improvement, I think. By the way, sometimes after your first action on a turn, you decide you need to use this ability. However, since this replaces the Drain Bonded item ability, instead of is what it says, you technically, going by rules as written, need the familiar on your person, which probably should be house ruled and maybe errated. Okay. Next is Arcane Schools. This is the big change. The 8 traditional D&D magical schools are removed. Now, I, in general, support this change. I'll have a link in the description to the video I did about this. I will not go into it here. This video will be too long already. But yeah, what's going? This is the 8 traditional schools of magic. necromancy, enchantment, abjuration, transmutation, divination, illusion, conjuration, and evocation. Every spell in the game, even those that wizards cannot cast because they're not in the arcane list, fall into one and only one of these spells in the current version of Pathfinder. But that's going away. Instead, they are being replaced by actual schools of magic, like Hogwarts, where someone learns to be a wizard. And then there's other wizards. We're going to go over the 6 new schools in a second. But first, as an exercise, I decided to study these 6 schools and the 2 focus spells that each school gives the wizard, potentially, to see whether any of them are just translations of the previous schools. And this is what I found. First, I did this cool color coding, and I looked at the focus spells for these 6 schools, and I found that pretty much every school draws from 2 of the old traditions, while there's 1 completely new focus spell. So that shows one of the things I argued in my video. They're freed up more in the design of schools. The School of Battle Magic may very well want to protect armies or their party through defensive spells that used to be in the School of Abjuration. Now on to the arcane schools themselves. First, they get more spells in their spellbook than they do currently. Instead of getting a bonus first rank spell from their curriculum added to their spellbook at first level, they get to add a cantrip and 2 first rank spells from their curriculum. This actually contradicts some text earlier in the wizard class under spellbook, which does not mention adding a cantrip from your curriculum. But I'm probably going to allow the cantrip. And also, every time you gain a level, in addition to the 2 spells you get with that level up added to your spellbook, you get to add an additional spell from your school's curriculum. That's new. By the way, it's possible you might already have every spell from your curriculum in that spell rank. As a GM, I would just let that be a free choice. So let's now go through the 6 schools. The School of Ars Grammatica, the School of Runes and Letters and Numbers. For their bonus spell slot per rank, and they also get a bonus cantrip preparation slot, must be filled by a spell on these lists. By the way, you can fill a 2nd rank bonus spell slot with one of the lower rank ones. And they get the initial focus spell at level 1. You need to get an 8th level feat to get the advanced school spell in any of these schools. These are its focus spells, and they're unchanged from the current versions of these focus spells. It's just that they've been remixed. They used to be from Abjuration and Divination. This used to be called Vigilant Eye. Next is the School of Battle Magic, a school established to help armies in war. These are the spells in their curriculum, and they get Force Bolt and Energy Absorption, which are unchanged from the current focus spells. Just, again, a remix. Then there's School of the Boundary, dealing with other dimensions and planes and creatures from them. This is their curriculum and their focus spells. These, too, are unchanged. Spiral of Horrors used to be Dread Aura. Then there's the School of Civic Wizardry, a school to support construction projects, civil engineering with magic. Well, here are their curriculum spells, and their focus spells include a brand new one, which I'll talk about in a sec. Earthworks adapts what used to be an illusion school focus spell called Warped Terrain. This does the same thing, except it cannot be disbelieved now because it's not an illusion. The advanced spell, Community Restoration, is a reaction to give temporary hit points to you and your allies when you cast a spell. Next is the School of Mentalism. This is their curriculum and their focus spells. These are unchanged from their previous version. I have an older video where I thought this was just possibly an adaptation of the School of Enchantment. However, this included illusion spells also, and it makes complete logical sense that spells from these 2 old schools would be in this school, to me. Next is the School of Protean Form, reshaping things, including flesh warping. This is their curriculum and their focus spells. Scramble Body is a adaptation of Call of the Grave. It has the same effects of sickening creatures. However, Call of the Grave required an attack roll, and this calls for a fortitude saving throw. Shifting Form is the same. I noted that it currently has the somatic component, requiring gestures, and it does not have the manipulate trait. I wondered if that was deliberate. I guess so, since you might be in melee if you're doing this, and you don't want to provoke a reactive strike. Next, we need to take a moment of silence. Because we've gone from 8 schools of magic to 6 arcane schools, there are some focus spells that didn't make the cut. Namely, Dimensional Steps that lets you teleport, Diviner Sight, Elemental Tempest, Life Siphon, and Physical Boost. Elemental Tempest, I think, has a spiritual successor and a feat, which I will talk about when that comes up. But yeah, Pathfinder Society Organized Play normally allows content from the old books, but if you're making a new character, a new wizard in Pathfinder Society, you must use the new wizard chassis. And these are made available via the old wizard, or the current wizard. You would need to talk to your GM basically to use these. And one thing I should have mentioned about these arcane schools is that there is language specifically saying you may talk to your GM to allow you to swap or add other spells to your curriculum if they strongly fit the theme. And I don't see why that might not extend to focus spells. Megan agrees. Finally, we talk about the School of Unified Magical Theory. Just as with current Universalist wizards, you do not get the bonus spell slot per spell rank that is filled by a specialized spell. They still retain the ability to use their Drain Bonded item once for every spell rank that they have. They also still get a bonus first level class feat. But unlike before, they get to add an additional first rank spell of their choice to their spellbook, and they get Hand of the Apprentice as a focus spell. Before, this required the Universalist to spend that bonus feat on the Hand of the Apprentice feat. Now it's free, and they get a focus point pool, of course, along with it. So essentially, this is the buff. They get an initial focus spell. Hand of the Apprentice works the same. There's a new focus spell called Interdisciplinary Incantation. If a creature within 30 feet casts an arcane spell, the wizard can cast that same spell before the end of their next turn, while expending a prepared spell of the same rank. You need to use a reaction to prepare this ability, however. Okay, on to the wizard feats. As with the other classes, they made an effort to get all of the class feats from the core rulebook and the advanced player's guide all here under one heading in one book. They put every feat in here, I think. But they also added a few new ones. And there's some buffs and tweaks that they made to current feats that I'll go over. First, Spellbook Prodigy. Currently, it's kind of a weak feat that lets you learn a spell in half the time. And it also prevented a critical failure when you tried to learn a spell. Also, if you fail to learn a spell, you get to try to attempt again in 1 week instead of having to earn a whole new level. This builds on all of those things, but gives you the Magical Shorthand skill feat, which furthermore was buffed from its previous version. By default, learning a spell of 6th rank would take 6 hours, and currently, Magical Shorthand reduces that substantially. There's some multiplication involved, but the current version just makes it 10 minutes, period. So if you find a scroll in your explorations, you might be able to add it to your spellbook right away. And also with spell substitution, prepare it. Okay, next is Conceal Spell. Actually, I lied a little earlier. 2 feats from earlier were merged into Conceal Spell. They were Conceal Spell and Silence Spell. The hiding the fact that your spellcasting part used to require a check, now it's just automatic. And because it gives it the subtle trait, it's no longer necessary to make incantations when casting the spell, thus making Silence Spell superfluous. So this is just a straight up buff and combining of feats. Next is Bespell Strikes. Currently it's called Bespell Weapon, so this can be applied also on unarmed attacks. You take the energy of a spell you just cast to add extra damage to your upcoming strike. Well, before, the damage depended on what school of magic you just cast the spell from. However, because the 8 schools are removed, it's now just a generic force damage. However, if your spell that you just cast dealt a specific type of damage, that is the type of damage added to your strike. This is also probably what we're going to see happen to similar feats and maybe one of the Magus class's abilities as well. This is a case where the removal of the 8 schools, I think, makes it simpler. You don't have to refer to a list and cross-reference what kind of damage you're doing. It's a nice streamlining that I welcome. Next is Call Wizardly Tools. This is currently called Call Bonded Item. It lets you teleport your bonded magical item to yourself. Well, they've added the ability to teleport your spellbook back to you, which is welcome for that niche situation where you are imprisoned and your items are taken from you. So they took a very niche feat and made it a little less niche. Next is Spell Protection Array. This is a brand new feat. Basically, you get to protect your allies with an action. Within 30 feet, you create a 5-foot burst, so a 10-foot by 10-foot square in reality. and give them a bonus to saving throws against magic. It lasts until the end of your next turn, and you can sustain it. Though I'm not sure why it talks about sustaining and durations. It's only until the end of your next turn, and nothing's stopping you from doing it an 11th time. Next is Explosive Arrival. When you conjure a being, it's an explosive arrival. There's a 10-foot emanation around the creature that does energy damage. And if the creature summoned has a energy trait or spirit trait, it does that kind of damage. Very thematic, very cool. And of course, the way emanations work is that if it's a large, huge, or gargantuan creature, it's 10 feet away from the borders of that creature. So this looks fun. And it's a free action. It's spell shape. You have to do it right before casting the spell. Next is Bond Conservation. This is the one that lets you reuse your Drain Bonded item ability to cast another spell 2 ranks lower before the end of your next turn. The change is subtle. It's in the timing. Before, you had to make the decision to use this and spend the action to do this before you drained your bonded item. You now get to reserve the right to make this decision after you see the result of your spell and decide to do it after. So that's a nice quality of life change for that ability. Next is Knowledge is Power. This is actually currently a Magus feat in Secrets of Magic. It's now been added to the wizard. When you critically succeed when recalling knowledge about a creature, you basically get bonuses against it, and you get to share those with your allies. What's changed here is that instead of giving bonuses to you and your allies, it imposes penalties on the creature. So this can combine with giving circumstance bonuses to your allies. However, when you compare it to the Magus feat, which gives 3 different bonuses and you get all of them, however, this one's comparable benefits are slightly different. This weakens its defense against not only your attack roll, but also a spell. And when it attacks you or your allies, it applies to their next offensive attack, as opposed to both their next attack against you and the next effect from them that you save against. Very tiny changes and a little annoying when I had to parse. Next is Scroll Adept, currently known as Scroll Savant. This is the one that lets you make 2 temporary spell scrolls during your daily preparations. This just adds clarifying language that other creatures can use your scrolls under the usual rules for scroll usage, so it must be on their spell list, and it uses their statistics. Next is Clever Counterspell. This is the broad and stronger version of Counterspell, where you just need to have prepared a spell that shares a trait with the spell you're trying to counter. It has removed the default -2 penalty to your counteract check to succeed at this. And as for sharing a trait, it excludes the Concentrate, Manipulate, and Tradition traits. I would also add the Rarity traits to that list, too. Okay, next is Secondary Detonation Array. That's a new one. This is a new spell shape feat. Spend an action before your spell that deals damage and affects an area and does not have a duration, and a glowing magic circle appears in a 5-foot burst in that area. 1 round from now, at the start of your next turn, it detonates and does 1d6 force damage per rank of the spell to all creatures. This is the spiritual successor to Elemental Tempest, one of our lost Arcane School focus spells, which made that damage happen immediately in an emanation around you. Well, this is nice in that you don't have to be in the middle of the fray in order to have the effect. Also, it's an occasion to do some teamwork and coordinating with your allies to use the new reposition action or grapple to hold them in place so that they can explode. Okay, next is Scintillating Spell. This currently exists, but not as a wizard feat. It is currently a sorcerer feat, and this spell shape action dazzles or blinds creatures that are in the area of the effect. Next is Second Thoughts. When a creature succeeds on its will saving throw against one of your mental spells, you get to go after someone else. To prepare it, you got to spend a reaction, and you got to do it before the end of your next turn. However, it does not expend a new spell slot. What's different here is it used to be them succeeding against an enchantment spell of yours. So this is now a broader group of spells. Spells that used to be from the Illusion School, anything that affects the mind. So the new version of Phantasmal Killer, Vision of Death, now is incorporated under this feat. And there's some clarifying language also that I won't go into. In my coverage of the previous remaster spellcasting classes, I covered the magical traditions they represented, and this is the last one. We're now going over the arcane spells. I've gone through a lot of these spells already in my coverage of the previous classes, so this thankfully was not as long a list. This is the Arcane list, so of course it is the biggest list of all. They're incorporating spells from the core rulebook and the Advanced Player's Guide to the extent possible. They had to trim some things to prevent this book being even more massive. So for funsies, I compared the Arcane spells from the combined core rulebook and Advanced Player's Guide to what we see in the player core. We go from 279 to 229. I also saw that my observation that they tried to preserve more of the lower rank spells is true. When you look at only the spells from the cantrip list and rank 1 and 2, they go from 106 to 100, and for everything above that, they go from 173 to 129. That should give you a sense of what we're not getting here in this book, and I assume we're going to see them in Player Core 2. Next, I want to point out that there's a lot of spells that currently are not arcane that now are arcane. It's not a small list. And I remember what Mark Seifter, one of the co-designers of Pathfinder, said in a stream discussing the removal of the 8 traditional D&D magical schools, that one of the problems that those posed was that it made the wizard kind of, he called it a green-eyed monster that seemed to gobble up everything. Every spell was something that they could specialize in. And so that to be jealous and protective about some spells not belonging in the arcane tradition that druids could say were theirs. This actually went back to first edition Pathfinder. It was a problem that he talked about. And the removal of the 8 schools now seems like it has the effect of removing that problem and allowing some spells that seem like it would be logical for them to be in the arcane list to be in the arcane list. And there's a lot of nature ones here as well. Things like Barkskin, now called Oak and Resilience. And we also see Soundburst, traditionally associated with Clerics and the Divine list, included in this list also as Noise Blast. So they're letting the green-eyed monster eat a little more and worried less about wizards swallowing everything. Now let's go through some spells, starting with cantrips. Again, I'm mentioning Gouging Claw because that's from Secrets of Magic, and it's a significant damaging spell. It does 2d6 damage and does 2 persistent bleed damage on a regular hit. It's been buffed in that regard. Next is Light. Well, this combines the old Light and Dancing Lights. Current Light lets you illuminate a specific object that you touch, and Dancing Lights gives you these mobile lights that you have to sustain and could move around. This now gives you the function of both without having to sustain like you currently do with Dancing Lights. It creates an orb of light that you can make circle a member of your party. You can then voluntarily sustain it in order to move it 60 feet, but you don't have to constantly. And you can have 4 light spells active. Currently you're limited to 1. And it's the number 4, which was the number of lights that could be part of Dancing Lights. So this is a buff. You can have a plumb bob floating above 4 members of your party. Next is Phantasmal Minion. This is a renamed Unseen Servant. You conjure something that can manipulate the environment, and it has statistics. What's different is that it's no longer unseen. It is not invisible. Everything else is the same. Unseen Servant is still a legal spell in Pathfinder Society, since this does not have an identical name. However, I might only allow this. It seems like a more balanced first level spell to me, because there is a final sacrifice combo I talked about in a recent video. Next is Acid Grip. This is the spiritual successor of Acid Arrow currently. Currently, Acid Arrow is an attack you make, and if it hits, it does persistent damage as well as instant damage. Well, this is now a saving throw spell. They make a reflex saving throw, and they take half damage on a regular success. This seems to be a trend in the remaster. A lot of spells that were attack spells have turned into saving throw spells that have a partial effect when they succeed. A change most people probably welcome. Also, when you strike the creature, you can move the creature as well. It has some utility. They thought this needed to be souped up, basically. And additionally, so long as they're taking persistent damage, which will be true if they were hit by it, they get a minus 10-foot status bonus, I should say penalty, to their speeds. Okay, next is Blazing Bolt. This is Scorching Ray, renamed. It's actually not changed at all. It's just that it's included in one of the core books now. It currently comes from Secrets of Magic. Next is Embed Message. This is Magic Mouth. However, it's not a mouth anymore. It is a visual message of text that circles the target and accompanied by a disembodied voice. It just adds words that people can read also, like a stock ticker. But you can heighten it now and give it other effects like odor, visual effect, or physical sensation, and you can make it repeat itself a lot. Next is Everlight. This is currently Continual Flame. What's interesting here is that they've removed the greater cost when you heighten it. So you can make a higher rank version of Everlight that is harder to dispel or counter with no extra cost. This is a buff against mean GMs who try to dispel Continual Light. I plead guilty. Next is Ghostly Carrier. This is the renamed Spectral Hand. You get to deliver touch spells with your Ghostly Carrier. What's changed here is that when it's destroyed from taking damage, it no longer does 1d6 damage to the caster. A little annoyance that has now gone away. Next is Revealing Light, which is the new version of Glitter Dust. It is similar to Glitter Dust. In addition to making them more visible, they are dazzled. They've removed the possibility of being blinded, but the dazzle effect operates on a regular success on their saving throw now. So it has gotten a balance pass. Next is a spell that used to only be on the primal list, Entangling Flora, also called Entangle. I mentioned this again here because we don't have the web spell in this book, and this seems to be the comparable spell to cast in its stead. However, it doesn't immobilize them on a regular failure on their saving throw like Web does. Web is still a legal spell, though, for tables who want to use it. Next is Elemental Form. It is unchanged, except for the fact that we now have metal and wood as elements in the Pathfinder system. And these forms are awesome. Metal lets you fly and do decent damage with a blade, and wood does 2d10 bludgeoning damage. Next, we jump to the 10th rank spell, Manifestation. This used to be called the Wish spell. Every spell tradition has their own version of Wish, and in the remaster, they've all been given this instead, which let them cast any spell of 9th rank or lower in their tradition, and lower rank spells from other traditions. And additionally, it let you wish something subject to GM fiat. That second function is now its own ritual, but what's left is the manifestation spell. So this gives unlimited flexibility to cast nearly every spell in the game. Now on that wish ritual, let's look at that. Whereas the current wish spell said that you could come up with something, it also made clear that it can't be too powerful or world changing. It said, the GM might allow you to try using Wish to produce greater effects than these, but doing so might be dangerous, or the spell might have only a partial effect. Well, greater effects than these has now become the Wish ritual, a rare ritual, and things that could change the world. Destruction of an entire kingdom, ascension to divinity. This is awesome. This is awesome. This is the Wish spell from the original editions of the game, however, gated behind a ritual that is rare. Also, it gives guidance too. Instead of having a kind of confrontational GM versus player interaction, this has 4 degrees of success, which give clear guidance with examples of how to adjudicate that result, which is appreciated. I like this version better than all previous iterations. So that exists. All right, closing statement. Where are we at with the wizard? Well, their proficiency with all simple weapons definitely is a buff and a quality of life improvement. The changes to spellcasting in general, universal proficiency, not needing a free hand are all buffs to the wizard. Also, I generally support moving away from the 8 traditional D&D magical schools because what you can come up with is infinite, more thematic, flavorful, grounded in the setting, and flexible. Also, nearly all of the changes, tweaks to spells that I've seen in this tour, I think have been improvements. However, I do have a couple of issues with the implementation of the new schools, and I'll go over them here. This summer, there was a mini uproar over the state of casters in Pathfinder 2e. There was concern that they were nerfing cantrips, and also the replacement of the 8 magical schools with these more limited curricula of the new arcane schools made some people say that Paizo was nerfing spellcasters, which I thought was a hasty conclusion at the time. As you can see, I did a series of videos addressing the brouhaha, and we needed to see more. It was kind of doesn't make sense. It's hard to believe that Paizo would have this scheme to weaken spellcasters in the game. And I think what we've seen so far has shown that they have not had this grand scheme. We've seen that they've had the explicit goal of buffing the witch class. The cleric war priest was something they also said that they would improve, and in my video on that, there was a lot of improvements in that department. We saw a key buff to bards of the warrior muse, and Paizo is promising a significant redesign of the oracle that comes out in Player Core 2 next summer. Also, the changes to the spells and to feats in general for the spellcasting classes have generally been nudges upward in power. And here we saw similar tweaks to the wizard's abilities. The ability of specialized casters to get more spells in their spellbook was probably a concession to the more limited spell lists that the curricula provide. But there's a couple of issues. First, the obvious one, we've gone from 8 magical schools to 6. That's a smaller number. And that means saying farewell to a few focus spells. That teleportation one looked cool, that are not in this version of the wizard. Also, and I pointed this out in some of my earlier coverage, we have a scaling issue with some of these curriculum spells. Here's the School of Battle Magic, and their specialized slot for first rank must take either Breathe Fire, Force Barrage, Mystic Armor. These are the current Burning Hands, Magic Missile, and Mage Armor. However, these are spells that numerically improve when you cast them at higher spell ranks, and once you leave those early levels of play, they are not useful at their original first rank of spell power. So when you become a 10th level character, being able to do Breathe Fire with 2d6 fire damage is kind of a waste of your time. You have cantrips and focus spells maybe that will perform better. Also, a couple of these schools I noticed had lackluster, at least to many players, lackluster cantrips. Ars Grammatica gives you Message and Sigil, and Civic Wizardry gives you Prestidigitation and Read Aura. These are all utility-focused spells. And by the way, Read Aura was buffed. I covered that in my Bard video on occult spells. Yeah, it does say that you can talk to your GM about swapping or adding other spells to your curriculum that strongly fit the theme. And I think for many GMs, that language, strongly fit, is pretty easy to implement and rein in any players who just want to get their favorite spell without regard to the theme of the school. The GM can stand on that language. However, there was no reason when making these spells to have, if anything, they should have included some spells that were broadly applicable and useful as cantrips and not have ranked spells that became weak in higher levels of play. That was a problem they could have avoided. And, this can be easily corrected. So this is kind of a small criticism, really, but it does pose an issue. I mean, it would have been another thing if they had explicitly said you can design schools yourself or talk to your GM, but this does not seem to countenance that. And I don't know if we've heard from Paizo. Maybe they said in his stream. I hope that we will see more schools, arcane schools, in future books. But the way this is presented, these 6 schools are what you're stuck with. Anyway, nothing is stopping anyone in the end from homebrewing their own curricula now. And in one of my videos, I made one that was a lot of fun. It seems like it would be an occasion of fun. So this is not a really big complaint in the end. Another issue I have is the change to focus spells. Right now, one has an incentive to get as many focus spells as they can because you can now refocus and get all 3 of your points back if you have enough time between encounters. And the number of focus points you have depends on how many focus spells you have. The problem is, though, that the wizard can only get 2 focus spells the way the wizard is currently set out if they don't venture outside of wizardry. Every school has 2 focus spells, the one you get for free at first level, and then the advanced one that you can get with an 8th level feat. And it's not clear to me why the wizard is the exception here of being the one spellcaster that doesn't have a low-level feat that lets them dabble into another discipline. Here's the Multifarious Muse for the Bard, the Order Explorer for the Druid. Clerics can take up other domains that their deity allows and get the focus spells from those. And heck, even the Ranger, which is a martial class, can get all of these focus spells, can get 10 of them in fact, actually can get 11 of them in fact, and the wizard can't get more than 2. It seems strange, and I don't think it's something that should remain. Anyway, I think it would be all right for a GM to homebrew a feat, the study abroad feat, the foreign exchange program feat that allows them to get a focus spell from another school. And maybe one of those focus spells that we lost in this version, maybe one of the focus spells from the core rulebook. I don't think that that would be broken unless there's something I haven't thought of. And maybe they could also switch out some of the curriculum spells so that they can avoid the issue I talked about earlier. And I'm going to cover this more in my coverage of the Witch class, but the Witch, the designers explicitly said they wanted to buff and improve the flavor of. And when we compare it to the Witch, we see that they have a number of abilities that are outside their spell slots, their limited daily resource, that let them do a whole bunch of things. Their familiar does an effect for free whenever they cast a hex spell or cantrip. There are hex cantrips. They can take feats to get what are called lessons to get more focus spells. And there are also feats that give their familiar a once per 10 minutes ability or once per hour ability that are kind of like extra encounter powers if we're using D&D 4e talk that don't use a focus point. So they have all of these additional things that they can do outside of their daily limited resource of spell slots. Whereas the wizard kind of doesn't. What they have is their focus spells, which they, unlike every other class, are limited to 2 points in casting. And it's kind of an interesting situation. I think I know how I looked at the Witch before the remaster, and I think others looked at it this way, that it was kind of like the wizard, but with a stronger familiar, but it wasn't very different from the wizard. And the fact that the Witch did not have some abilities of the wizard meant that people asked, well, why not just be a wizard? It feels like the designers knew about that perception, so buffed the Witch, but we now may have a little of a reverse problem, maybe. I'll go back to this question in the Witch video. In the meantime, let's have some perspective. The wizard has advantages that are unique to it. It has an arcane thesis that lets them do a number of things that no other class can. And they have, at least compared to the Witch, more spell slots. Now, for comparing to the Witch, I think the point of comparison might be the wizard who takes the improved familiar attunement arcane thesis, and I will make that comparison during my Witch coverage. So that's my coverage of the wizard. I have been Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I'm almost done with this series covering the remaster. If you want to be notified about the next videos, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Also, join my Discord. We have now over 4,500 people who talk Pathfinder and other games, and people play Pathfinder there. We have a drop-in organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern. And also, join my Patreon. I don't earn income as a lawyer. The Patreon helps me continue making these videos, and you get exclusive access to videos, including me spending 3.5 hours going over the player core and GM core with people on my Discord. And for tier 2 supporters and above, you can see me running Pathfinder for D&D YouTubers. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Ronald, the Rules Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.